It was a dark and stormy night in the small town of Millfield. Mrs. Lemons and Mr. Tomatoes were walking home from a community meeting when they noticed a strange figure following them. Mr. Tomatoes turned to Mrs. Lemons and whispered, "Do you see that person following us?" Mrs. Lemons turned around and gasped, "Who is that? They're walking towards us." The figure continued to approach them, and as they got closer, Mrs. Lemons could see that it was a man wearing a dark hooded jacket. "Excuse me, do you need help?" asked Mr. Tomatoes, trying to keep his voice calm. The man didn't answer, but instead continued to walk towards them with a slow and steady pace. Mrs. Lemons started to feel uneasy. "I think we should start walking faster," she said to Mr. Tomatoes. They quickened their pace, but the figure didn't seem to be deterred. He kept walking towards them, and as he got closer, they could see that he was holding something in his hand. Suddenly, the figure pulled out a knife and pointed it at them. "Give me your money and your phones," he demanded in a deep, menacing voice. Mrs. Lemons and Mr. Tomatoes froze in terror. They had never been in a situation like this before, and they didn't know what to do. "Come on, hurry up," shouted the figure, brandishing the knife. Mrs. Lemons slowly reached into her purse and pulled out her wallet, handing it over to the man. Mr. Tomatoes reluctantly gave the figure his phone. As the man turned to run away, Mrs. Lemons shouted, "Hey, what's your name?" The figure stopped and turned around. "Why do you want to know?" he asked, still holding the knife. "I just want to know who robbed us," Mrs. Lemons said, trying to keep her voice steady. The figure took a step towards them. "You want to know who I am? I'll show you who I am." He pulled off his hood, revealing a disfigured face with scars and burns. Mrs. Lemons and Mr. Tomatoes gasped in horror. "I am the ghost of Millfield," the figure said, his voice echoing through the empty streets, "and I will haunt this town forever." He turned and ran away, disappearing into the darkness. Mrs. Lemons and Mr. Tomatoes were left standing there, shaking with fear. They knew that they had just encountered something truly terrifying, and they weren't sure if they would ever feel safe again.